الجزائر الدولية تنقل إليكم صوت الجزائر، تضعكم في الصورة وترسم لكم الطريق عبر محللين مختصين ومراسليها في العالم. إذاعة الجزائر الدولية، صوتنا في العالم.
With Radio Algeria International, you will not miss a single major political or economic event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
Foreign Affairs Minister Mr. Ahmed Hattaf, representing the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, at the Africa-Korea Summit, has taken part in the second segment on the development of economic cooperation in Seoul, South Korea. The daily newspaper Al Mujahid has reacted to an infamous tweet by the leader of the French party, Les Républicains, who made a frontal attack on Algeria. Slovenia has officially recognized the state of Palestine, thus becoming the 147th country to officially do so. Those were the major developments. Now the full news edition. Good afternoon. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Mr. Ahmed Hattaf, took part in the second segment of the Africa-Korea Summit on the development of economic cooperation in Seoul, South Korea, as part of the working visit entrusted by the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune. Mr. Hattaf held talks with his counterpart from the Republic of Korea, Mr. Cho Tae-ryul, with whom he reviewed the various aspects and dimensions of cooperation between the two countries. During the meeting, the two men focused on the promising prospects for developing bilateral relations, especially as Algeria is the only African country to maintain a bilateral strategic partnership with the Republic of Korea. The two ministers held a level of bilateral coordination, particularly in the context of the two countries' mandates as non-permanent members of the Security Council. The two sides also exchanged views on the latest developments relating to the continuing Israeli aggression against the Gaza Strip in the light of the proposals currently being negotiated to halt this aggression and deal with the deplorable humanitarian situation in Gaza. On the first day, the Foreign Affairs Minister stressed the need to expand beyond traditional donor-recipient relationships, adding that the partnership must primarily address Africa's political, economic and social priorities, and stressing the need to adopt a unifying voice that includes all African countries and member states in the African Union.
أولاً ضرورة تجاوز النطاق المحدود.
First, it is necessary to go beyond the limited framework of the relationship between the donor and recipient countries so that the countries of our continent can make an effective contribution to the adoption of the content and mechanisms of this relationship. Secondly, it is imperative that this partnership meets, first and foremost, Africa's political, economic and social priorities. And thirdly, the need to adopt a voice that brings together and integrates African countries and member states into our continental organization, the African Union, without excluding them through favorism.
The Foreign Affairs Minister held a strong cooperation between the African Group and South Korea in the Security Council on African issues, thanking South Korea for supporting Palestine's UN membership and hoped it will recognize Palestine as a state.
I would like to welcome the high level of coordination between the African Group and the Republic of Korea within the Security Council, particularly on issues relating to peace, security and development on the African continent. I would also like to thank the Republic of Korea for its support and vote in favor of Palestine in joining our UN organization, and we hope that this will be followed by the Republic of Korea recognizing the state of Palestine. As for the economic aspect of the Africa-Korea partnership, we welcome the initiatives and cooperation efforts proposed by the Republic of South Korea to strengthen it in the 7 key areas.
That was the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Mr. Ahmed Hattaf. Still in Korea, Foreign Affairs Minister Ahmed Hattaf has been received in Seoul, South Korea as part of his participation in the Africa-Korea Summit by the President of Eritrea, Isaias Afwerki, who asked him to convey his greetings and best wishes to the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune. During the meeting, the two parties reviewed the prospects of bilateral relations and the developments in the security and political situation at continental level, in addition to the role of the mechanisms for joint African action in the face of the acute crisis in international relations at this time. Mr. Ahmed Hattaf also held a meeting with the Minister of International Cooperation and the Promotion of Public-Private Partnerships of the Republic of Congo, Denis Christel Sassou Nguesso. He also met several of his African counterparts on the sidelines of the event as part of the consultation and coordination on the issues on the summit agenda, as well as on upcoming continental events. Foreign Affairs Minister Ahmed Hattaf has received a telephone call from the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on the development in the situation in the Gaza Strip. The two ministers held a special exchange of views on the initiative announced by the President of the United States, Joe Biden, aimed at ending hostilities in Gaza, increasing access for humanitarian aid, and preparing for reconstruction in this territory. The two ministers also examined the conditions under which the American initiative could be taken up by the Security Council. Mr. Hattaf insisted for his part on the need to seize the opportunities offered by this initiative to ensure that it is in line with the objective of a lasting ceasefire, that it puts an end to the hardships endured by the Palestinian people in Gaza, and finally, that it constitutes a step towards a final, just and lasting settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict through the establishment of a sovereign and independent Palestinian state, in line with international law and the increasingly strong will of the international community. And now the Chief of Staff of the National People's Army, General Zaid Changriha, has said in the eastern province of Constantine that the army will remain on its guard against all those who support the scourge of drug trafficking and all kinds, which is part of the vile plans being hatched against Algeria.
إن من بين أخطار التهديدات التي تواجهها بلادنا اليوم.
Among the most serious threats facing our country today are underhand attempts to flood it with drugs and narcotics of all kinds with the aim of undermining the physical and psychological health of the nation's living forces. In this context, I would like to draw attention to the alarming upward trend in the trafficking of psychotropic drugs of all kinds into our country in recent times. Statistics from the various security services show that huge quantities of these poisons have been seized, and the criminals and the country's enemies are trying to smuggle them into the country.
The Army General urged its personnel to redouble their efforts to combat it by all possible means.
Within the People's National Army, we attach a particular importance to the fight against this pernicious phenomenon, and we will have no tolerance towards these barons. In this sense, we will continue to fight vigorously against all these who encourage, support, or finance this harmful scourge by reinforcing our military and security mechanisms all along our borders.
That was the Chief of Staff of the National People's Army, General Mr. Zaid Changriha. Prime Minister Nadir Herbawi has reviewed with the President of the Algerian Economic Renewal Council, Kouria Kamel Moula, the support measures taken in favor of economic operators, notably with regard to economic land, free zones and export promotion, in accordance with the guidelines of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune. Discussions also focused on the issue of interest rates on investment loans and ways of developing national tourism and promoting e-payment in accordance with the President's guidelines. The chairman of the Kouria expressed his satisfaction with the increase in the volume of investment recorded in recent months and the measures taken by the President of the Republic to support economic operators. The Daily Al Mujahid newspaper has reacted to an infamous tweet by the leader of the French right-wing party, Les Républicains, who made a frontal attack on Algeria, underlining that this publication expresses the tenacious and hateful resentment of part of the French political class towards Algeria. Jamal Samani has more details in this report.
Eaten away from the inside, part of the French political class is sinking under the effects of the Algerian neurosis, a pathology it contracted in 1962, wrote Al Mujahid in its editorial entitled Bankruptcy and Decadence of a Part of the French Political Class, Pathetic Fall. The newspaper says, there is no sign of remission yet, and the fall is pathetic. The latest example is an outrageous tweet expressing the tenacious and hateful resentment towards Algeria, the lost paradise for those nostalgic for French Algeria. Speaking to Radio Algeria International, political analyst and president of the Algerian Competencies League Abroad, Mr. Mohamed Makhrouf, talked about the infamous tweet by Les Républicains and the Mujahid's reaction.
Une bonne partie de la classe politique française dernièrement.
Part of the French political class took a stand and acted with persistence against the Algerian community settled in France, against any policy undertaken for a rapprochement between Algiers and Paris and closer relations between Algeria and France. Part of this French political class still believes in the French Algeria and that history can stay that way. These parties are demonstrating today and are taking Algerians hostage with political speculations, ambushes and political manipulations with different personalities in order to destabilize this community and Algeria.
Pointing out that the Les Républicains party had attacked Algeria head-on, Al Mujahid pointed out that the reason for such a behavior simply lies in the fact that the country of 5 million martyrs has simply asked France to return its historical and symbolic poetry, and that was enough to set things alight.
You're still listening to Radio Algeria International, and at least 4 civilians today were killed in an Israeli air raid on the central Gaza Strip. Local sources reported that 4 civilians were killed in a raid targeting a gathering of citizens in the El Rimeid neighborhood. The Palestinian death toll from the Israeli onslaught since October 7th has risen to 36,550 reported fatalities, with an additional 82,959 reported injuries. The majority of the victims are women and children. Dozens of bodies of Palestinian martyrs who disappeared during the Zionist bombardments in the Gaza Strip since last October were found by teams of rescuers who intervened in the aftermath of the aerial bombardments by the Zionist occupation, notably in the village of El Masdar and the town of Deir el-Balah. And now the United Nations coordinator for the Middle East peace process, Tor Wennesland, has said that the scenes of destruction and suffering in Gaza are heartbreaking, explaining that the delay of enriching a ceasefire agreement in the Strip will cost more lives every day. In a message on the X platform, Tor Wennesland said that he had gone to Gaza and that he had seen with his own eyes the devastating impacts of the hostilities in the Strip. He added that it is clear urgent measures are needed to alleviate the humanitarian crisis facing the Gaza Strip. He said, "What I saw in Gaza is a cruel reminder of the humanitarian cost of the Zionist wars," adding that the delay in reaching a ceasefire agreement in the Strip will cost more lives every day. Slovenia Minister of Foreign Affairs Mrs. Tanja Fajon has said that her country was leaving a historic day as Slovenia became the 147th country to officially recognize the State of Palestine, stressing the recognition of Palestine is an expression of Slovenia's commitment to peace and justice. She added that Slovenia is on the right side of history by contributing to the two-state solution for a lasting peace. Meanwhile, several international organizations held the vote of the Slovenian parliament to issue a decree recognizing the State of Palestine. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, and the Arab Parliament held the decision, saying it was an important and historic step that advances the establishment of justice and freedom for the Palestinian people, affirming their legitimate rights, including the right for self-determination, with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. For its part, the Arab Parliament said the recognition represents a clear response to the failed plans of the occupying entity to liquidate the Palestinian cause in the light of a war of genocide, ethnic cleansing and forced displacement against Palestinian civilians in the Gaza Strip and the occupied West Bank. Student and college campuses around the world have exploded in recent weeks in protests calling for ceasefire in Gaza and for doing justice to Palestinians. Jemison Mani has the details.
Protesters have been demanding that their schools sever any direct or indirect financial and academic links with the Israeli occupation. Our California-based political analyst and university professor Hamoud Salhi said despite the arrests and violence against demonstrating students in the United States, protesters are not discouraged and they still shout for a free and peaceful Palestine.
The students' movement in the United States and all over the world is still alive and moving at a faster speed than expected. We continue to see demonstrations in favor of the Palestinians. Some of them are raising new issues that pertain to their causes, specifically the freedom of speech or the rights of the indigenous population, all inspired by the resilience and the struggle that the Palestinians are leading in Gaza. Also, in spite of the challenges and threats to their future, these students have not shied away from expressing publicly their support for Palestine. Some students in the United States who demonstrated in support of Palestine have been severely punished and unfairly for their actions. They were denied their graduation diploma. But despite all of this, they tell reporters that they do not have any regrets for their actions, are bent to continue their struggle for the freedom of Palestine.
He added that these demonstrations are not only a call for doing justice to Palestinians, but also a call for imposing social justice all around the world.
Palestinian leaders noted the students' demonstration are clear testimonies for their defense and their support for the Palestinian cause, but more so for social justice. It is in this context that the students are bent on continuing their fight for Palestine and are bent on seeing through this until the war stops and Israel is held accountable for its action.
The crackdown of students in the U.S. in all its forms failed to discourage students from raising the voice of justice and inspired other students from all around the world to follow suit.
Hundreds of Zionist settlers stormed the esplanade of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the occupied city of Al-Quds under the protection of the Zionist occupation police. The settlers entered the mosque in successive groups from the side of the Maghribi Gate, led provocative marches on its esplanades, and performed Talmudic rituals in its courtyards. The police of the Zionist occupier has transformed the old town of occupied Al-Quds into military barracks, deployed 3,000 troops, and tightened their restrictive measures at the gates of Al-Aqsa Mosque. In the Western Sahara file, the representatives of the member states of the Geneva Support Group for Western Sahara have reiterated their firm support for the struggle of the Sahrawi people and their legitimate cause to wrest their right to self-determination and independence. And now the United Nations top humanitarian official Martin Griffiths, who is stepping down from his post at the end of June, said he was leaving the job with a sense of work unfulfilled because the world is a worse place now than when he joined up in 2021. Griffiths, who is the United Nations Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, said humanitarian diplomacy is both an opportunity for us to do good for the world, but also its ubiquity is a reminder of the absence of classic political diplomacy.
I have noticed in these last 3 years of being in the humanitarian world how humanitarian diplomacy has been obliged to take a front seat in the absence of much political diplomacy because of the divisions, the geopolitics that we face today. We are proud in the United Nations of the fact that we were able, using humanitarian diplomacy and mediation, to get a deal on the Black Sea Grain Initiative and the Memorandum of Understanding that the UN signed, the Secretary General signed with Rebecca Greenspan in the lead with the Russian Federation on their exports. That was a piece of diplomacy which depended on the fact that enemies could sign up on an agreement, not directly on the same page, but about an agreement, because it was for a greater good beyond it, for global food security.
In Sudan, he said, we see the absence still in our efforts to stop that conflict.
We are desperately worried about El Fasher, 800,000 civilians at risk there. The humanitarian situation in Sudan has grown worse, and it is a place where two men basically decided that they were going to resolve their differences through fighting, that they were going to take their country down, that we have a situation where highly likely we will have up to 5 million Sudanese people at risk of famine when the next report comes in, which will be in the coming weeks. I don't think we've ever had that kind of number at risk of famine. And this was an avoidable conflict. And that's my double point here. We're not winning on ending conflicts.
That was the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, Mr. Martin Griffiths. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International on World Environment Day, celebrated annually on June 5th, serves as a global platform to raise awareness and inspire action for the protection of our planet. More in this program by Jamil Simani. Stay tuned on Radio Algeria International.
Dear humankind,